welcome everyone to our 5 lessons from across the vendor community webinar. We are really happy to have you all with us today. First of all, my name is Marcela Alves, and I'm going to be the moderator for today. We're going to have just some points before we start, and this session is going to be recorded. So if you have any issues with that, please leave me a comment below on the chat or where you feel more comfortable. And if you also have any questions during the webinar, if you found something not clear or you'd like to know something else about it, please let me know in the comments and I'll pass it over to the team. And if you feel like speaking up and sharing your ideas with us, I'll find the best moment for you to jump in. With me today, I have 2 special guests, William Cass and Claudia Lima. William is director at Pegasus and Claudia Lima is the co-founder of Pegasus. So I'm really happy to pass the word to William. Hello, William. How are you?
Hey, Marcela. Yeah, thanks very much. My name is Will Cass. I'm a vendor alliance director. So in a previous life, I worked as a sales enablement guy for Cisco across the EMEA and APAC regions. And over the last few years, been delivering various technical programs in the post-sale services space for quite a number of different vendors, both very large and very fast growing as well. So looking forward to today as both an opportunity to share ideas with colleagues, but also as a bit of a cathartic release, as to talking about lessons learned is often about licking one's wounds and trying to find the salient points. I don't know if you agree, Claudia.
Yeah, so hello. My name is Claudia Lima, and I am a co-founder of Pegasus. For the last 20 years, I've been leading a team of professional engineers in technologies, providing post-sale services globally. And it's a pleasure to be here today, sharing with you some of the lessons we have learned in the last over 20 years now, really, when it comes to scaling your post-sale services. So I agree with you, Will, that it's great to be able to have the opportunity to speak quite freely and share with all of you lessons that we have learned that will hopefully help you to scale your services to your customers. So thanks for coming.
Awesome. So with that in mind, I guess we have five lessons learned. We hit the first one. Perhaps I go first, Claudia, and we can just talk through it, because I think internal alignment, it's an obvious statement to make right now. As a point of departure, I think it's worth reflecting on what I mean by post-sale services, and because I think that has subsequently an impact, right? And there's certain assumptions to the way I've seen the world. So the first thing is that I work with teams that deliver kind of 4 key post-sale services. So technical training, field engineering, customization, integration, development, and residency services. So where an engineer goes on site for a year or multiple years. And that we do that as a partner of vendors. So internal alignment, with that as the sort of context to how we think about things, I suppose internal alignment is really, really important. So are you aligned? Is the wider team aligned? So for us, it really depends on what problem we're solving as to how we get engaged. But one of the areas I think we often see is where either there isn't strong internal alignment to start with, or that alignment starts to lose it. We start to become misaligned as time goes on. So we might have alignment on the services side in EMEA, but not the services side in the US. We might have regional agreement, but we might not have channel visibility. We might have channel on side, but we're not so sure about another region. So I think often if there is about value in terms of partnerships, when you work with partnerships to scale, and I make the assumption that a lot of folk want to do that, I think there is there are some question marks around scaling your internal bench. Folk do like to partner with services only organizations, but there are also guys and vendors that will go through VARs and disties and so forth. But what is that internal alignment, and how can you sustain that, right? And I guess that leads to my second point, which is strategic, not tactical. And again, I think that's important for sustained value. So thinking about how we can scale. What is the problem we're actually trying to solve, and how systemic is it? There are occasions when we're asked to engage to solve a particular problem, like, I need field engineering in Brazil because we've got a couple of big deals coming in and we haven't got anyone in that space. Well, that sort of makes sense. The challenge then is if we end up tacking against the wind every time we get to where we need, things change. So how strategic is this decision? And then that leads into how you want to scale. So where do partners or ecosystem partners sit within that? So are ecosystem partners part of your, is that your delivery mechanism of choice? Are partners a delivery mechanism of last resort? How is it a regional thing? How is it that you want to go about it? And I think having that clarity and then trying to sustain it, for me at least, is some of the areas where I think we've seen different vendors, particularly fast growing mid-size, so under 1,000 seats or a couple of thousand seats and growing quite fast. That typically an area where we see folk tripping over, right? Because there are a lot of corporate pressure to grow revenue and so forth, and we're trying to make sense of that services play within it. I don't know if that makes any sense to you, Claudia, or does that chime with you?
Yeah, it totally does. It even though sometimes within companies that want to provide those post-sale services with quality, timely, etc., even though they all want the same, they have the same objective, they often are not aligned on how they want to achieve that. And it kind of becomes like a push and pull, like you mentioned yourself. You might not have the full information, or the objectives is slightly different. And therefore, not until you have that internal alignment and have a plan ahead, it's very difficult to have a very effective approach to how you're going to deliver those professional services. And it becomes very difficult for your partners to participate in that journey because it's constantly changing. So I totally agree with you. We have had experience with some of our partners that one group of people within the company really work very hard and have a vision of what they want, but they forgot to check with the rest of the team, like you said, maybe in different countries, and they have another proposition. So it might not be that one is better than the other, but you need to have alignment internally, what you're trying to achieve, so that you can work towards it together. And that is very important. That is very, very important. So I agree with you. And that brings a lot of frustration, because you can do a lot of work, a lot of pedaling and not move, because not having the whole team together pedaling at the same speed towards the same direction. And you could have then start looking into an area where you want to provide training, or you want to provide some consultancy for your customers, but another team is thinking of doing it in a different way. So that is very important to have that defined, and transparency of what you have defined as well is very important. So I can see, and William, I think you normally get that more on your everyday basis, don't you, in your experience on how difficult it is to work with teams that each one pushes and pulls in different areas, in different directions.
You're certainly always going to get a bit of that, right? I mean, big organizations have different priorities. We come together under one, strategic initiative, and we try to drive it. But yes, I think having to constantly sort of manufacture consent for a particular program or project can sometimes detract from that. So, but there are some easy ways of achieving that. I think firstly, it's about, having that one champion for what you're trying to achieve at the right level of seniority. Interestingly, it's not cross seniority. It's actually sometimes you get your VP buy-in, but you don't necessarily get your managerial buy-in. So it's almost between strategic and tactical as opposed to across business units. But it manifests in lots of different ways. But it's important, if I could speak to the pretty picture of the ducks, to have your ducks lined up. So that's regardless of what that means, Marcella. And that, I guess, dovetails into point 2. Claudia, please, after you, I guess, culture in service delivery is always interesting.
Yeah, it most definitely is something often overlooked or taken for granted, that the culture within the company of trusting your partners, trusting the work, and part of that alignment as well, that is taken for granted and not often worked upon. So you need to be able to have that strategy and be very transparent about what is happening, have open communication across those within the company, and also have, when I say transparency with your objectives, your challenges as well, what your challenges are, and to be able to get that through. You will find that this culture of trust will filter through to your partners, and also will filter through to the partner on site when they're delivering that service, that of trust in the company, in the services, and trust in the delivery of that service as well. And that really brings to your end customer that confidence they're working with the right people as well, because they will get the quality, they'll get what they need with that level of trust and transparency that you get. Every IT, software development, all of these areas, they're highly complex, and you need to have a team working towards providing that professional service together. Things will go right, things will go wrong. Hopefully not many will go wrong, but it's highly complex. And therefore that openness, that sharing of information and that trust is very important. So this is how I see it. The culture also permeating through all the way to the delivery of the work.
Yeah. So for me, I think about this culture of trust. I always think about the relationship between the vendor and the delivery partner, depending, whoever that is, right? And I often reflect on this question of, what kind of set of relationships we have with them, and often and unintentionally, intentionally as well, it can often feel or is very, very transactional, and that of course has a set of implications. And I'm reminded of a conversation I had with a VP of global services for a large database company. I can't mention folks' names really on the call without having asked them previously, but the conversation in mind takes me to, I think is it April 2019, when we had our first kind of global lockdowns and people were stopping going on site, and we had quite a large field engineering team delivering projects on their behalf. The gentleman in question, we had to have an awkward conversation, right? Our guys are benched for the unforeseeable, for however long that was going to be. The gentleman in question was very, very transparent. We both knew what the typical response of a business is, which is to take a lot of this back in-house, to drive it through your customer success teams, drive it through your development teams at the sacrifice of the partner ecosystem. And that wasn't a surprise, but he handled that conversation very, very well, very, very openly. And I think for me, then, communication is trust in that respect. The other one I think that starts to build it, when you think about delivering, and this can be technical training, it can be residencies, it can be field engineering, it can be various, pipeline of development projects. It's about mind share. So being really, really mindful from a vendor perspective of the impact our decisions have on our ecosystem. A very, very large vendor, this wasn't related to us, but expressed to me by a former colleague of mine, the frustration she felt when she worked for a business that was doing, $15-16 million worth of training with the company, that the vendor announced on the day what their decision was, which is going to fundamentally change the business model of their partners. So no conversation, no discussion, no wider sort of consideration, just a very, very strongly worded corporate diktat. At a smaller level, of course, because not all of these things we can affect in our humble roles, there are always ways in which we can start to build mindshare with each other. And that's as small as just thinking about the impact of pulling projects, not looking for alternative projects, how you onboard, how do we do our projects from a partnership perspective within the services community. And I think it's important to do that because we have different care abouts, but that same goal, right? So look at the majority of the vendor community. The core metric there is revenue, right? And your year-on-year growth of that particular revenue metric for very, very obvious reasons, which is one of the reasons why utilization rates of services engineers isn't necessarily the core kind of care about there. But of course, for a services business who's delivering, residency programs, feel it very human intensive, utilization rates are key. So just recognizing, I think, that everyone's coming from and not forgetting that we're coming from a kind of, let's say, different concerns, but with the same goal, I think also helps to build trust on both sides. I think the final point as well is, it always gets rough to have resiliency. And I think we can only really see that great philosopher Mike Tyson said that, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face. And I think that's quite right as well when it comes to delivering services, because inevitably there's some countries and places and projects over the years. We've had all sorts of fun and games. It's been visas. It's been we had a guy trapped in a lift. We've had all sorts of things that have caused, quite significant impacts to projects that you wouldn't have thought individually that they would. But of course, when there's a fire, and there is always a fire, it's about how we put them out and how we take those lessons learned, right? Quickly disseminate and move forward. So for me, I think that also has an impact on trust when we recognize we're in it for the value of the relationship in and of itself. And that's important in
many ways. In many ways, William, I find this culture of trust would be reflected in the first point that you made with the aligning internally. So trusting the teams working towards the same goal and following the strategy that being put together, and that evolving into trust with the partners you're working with to provide the same service, to have the same view. So definitely there
is that, I guess, but there's also an internal and an external dialogue, and that's sometimes where there's change, right? So I think, especially when we're talking about delivering services in lots of different languages and lots of different cultures, I mean, we deliver projects in Brazil, in Saudi, in Russia, Western Europe, the US, Singapore. These places they couldn't get more different if you tried. But one of the important things for us in terms of understanding how to maneuver our troops around the board is what's really going on, right? And so I think having porous borders, having a porous external wall between the services organization, whatever that services organization is, within the vendor and the partner delivering the work is really, really important. And then to ensure that the voice and the message is as consistent to the internal one as you're able to or allowed to go, because often you can be told, get information, and you think, right, well, I'll wait a week and then I'll ask him again, and you'll get a real answer. But that erodes trust. Let us know what's going on. Let us know what we know. Things change. We know pipeline moves around and fluctuates. But that is, to your point, Claudia, transparency and openness is key around partnership. Just ask my partner. Marcella.
Yeah.
Claudia, you obviously have led a number of engineering teams over your number of years in the industry. Did you want to go first on lessons learned?
You're right. It's been an amazing experience working with our partners and training them, upskilling them in different ways. And one of the things that is important to understand when you upskilling your team, training your team in different areas, is that there are different ways of doing it. To sort of, it might be that you're doing the traditional technical training with lots of hands-on, or it might be that you're doing training. That kind of training may be followed up by mentoring, by being with them on site. And so there are many different ways in which you can deliver training. William is going to develop that a little bit more. But the importance of training is very big, because you want to provide that quality. You want to provide, and even this trust, when you trust your consultants out there on the field, you trust your partners because you have invested in that training and putting together, sort of putting a plan, a process in place that everybody can follow up. Another point that is very important here is as that training, you might know what you need to train your engineers on, but also to have transparent process. Where is it leading to? Also have the clear sign-offs for the engineers, and William is going to extend that a little bit more for us. So again, I was listening to a speech, and this guy said that he was very reluctant in investing in training, because very often what would happen is he would invest a lot of money on the training of individual engineers within his company, and then they would leave. And I remember the other person said, well, that is not so good, I understand, but it's much worse if you don't train them and they stay. So what do you want? You want to have professionals that are confident in that knowledge, and also know that upskilling and that training is ongoing to support them to be able to deliver that service that you want to deliver for your customers with quality, and provide as well. Training always provides satisfaction within within the company. As an engineer myself, I have great satisfaction in learning new things, in learning new technologies or new ways of working with the technologies I'm familiar with. And so that upskilling doesn't only provide good quality of service to your customers, but also huge retention of the people that you're working with. So often undermined, just learn as you go along. Yes, you can learn as you go along. It's one of the ways of doing it. But taking advice from those that understand how to do it and putting the processes to achieve what you want to do. So very important to do that.
Yeah. I mean, I agree, although I think the issue might be somewhere, I think about it in a slightly different way. To mind at the moment, as you were talking, I was thinking there is only one, well, admittedly very large UC vendor that doesn't have any sort of training for services partners, which is interesting to say the least, given their size and the scale of the projects they're involved in. There are ways of figuring it out. I think the main issue with upskilling and training, and from that I mean readiness of partners, engineers to go and deliver services as close or better than the quality delivered by the vendors, right? Is the first major challenge, which isn't really a bullet point, but I think it underpins the points on there, is that folks sometimes struggle to put together a process that's fit for non-internals. So very often, and with a large percentage of folk, we're often the first one serious services only partner that they'll work with, and they say, okay, because we can do the language, we can do the coverage, and say, okay, so what we'll do is we'll run you through the internal process, which initially sounds great because that's exactly what we want. We say, well, we want to be as good or if not better than your guys. We need that experience difference to be near zero between the both of our entities when we go to to customers. But the difference is there's a challenge because you don't get to sit folk on a course for 12 weeks and then shadow for 12 weeks and then we have to turn them around a little bit faster. So I think in the utilization focused services area, right, without costing points on quality. So there's the challenge we have. Sometimes that takes folk thinking outside of the box. Recently had for a network control vendor, I have 2 guys aligned to them for 3 months, and I think they're shadowing, and the utilization rate for these guys on the shadowing was around 30%, 25 to 30%, which wins the prize for the lowest utilization rate ever for a shadow, because they're not doing anything. Now, I understand there are challenges because you need to get customer consent if it's not built into your agreements with the customers to have them shadow, and so I get it. But I also know this customer has about 70 projects going on at the moment. So I'm sure we could have done something with the other 75% of their time, which becomes dead time because we don't know when they are and so forth. So a couple of challenges. First one, build a process for scale, bearing in mind that services organizations want to match to your capability and skills levels, but have a different vehicles to be able to do that. And so for that, it's about finding a balance between readiness and partner ROI. For that, I wanted to quick shout out to Nutanix, because I don't want to mention folk have done things badly, but happy to shout out when someone's done it well. Nutanix, their services group in EMEA are actually really, really interesting because we deliver field engineering services for them. We've got some PMO capability with them internally, and we do some residency stuff for them in different languages in different parts. So Germany, France, Italy, Spain, and the UK. And they take a very pragmatic approach to it, right? So you look at it, say, okay, this is the project going on. It's going to be on site for 18 months. We know what the profile of the person is, assuming that's correct, and they're the right guy. They've gone through some sort of vetting with us and with the company. We'll then look at what they need to know to be able to go on to be able to be ready. And this is really, really different to other folk who maybe have very serious, very, very have standards that they need to be achieved in training that don't necessarily map to what the person's going to be doing on the job. And so there's a question mark around, or just making sure that we're actually balancing the amount of what we're asking of folk to go through and actually the job they're going to do, because it's always easier to say they must jump the biggest hurdle, but is it practically so? Because ultimately we're in the business of trying to keep us customer satisfaction, customer retention, grow in MRR rates, increase company valuation as a result, right? A lot of that is down to the fact that services deliver bodies that can deliver great value in service. So shout out to Nutanix for being able to do that in a really practical way. And then they have that internal guide that gets us the shadow we need across the geos, right? The other point around clear sign-off standards with engineers is a great example. So at what point is an engineer ready to deliver projects? There is sometimes, there's an internal one. What's that external one look like, right? And I think sometimes that's where we get a little bit, not necessarily scope creep, but reticence to say, yeah, we're ready. Or the person responsible to say, right, this person is now signed off. The more complex the solution, arguably, the harder it is to set that standard given. But at some point, you have to say, the process works. It's worked before. This person's right, and we're ready to go. And it's quite interesting to note that those sign-off, those standards aren't always either highlighted or sort of agreed to. And my final point around making sure you can scale your efforts is making sure that there's the smallest possible gap between the course the guys might attend, the shadowing that they do following one of the vendor guys, and then their reverse shadowing, if that's part of the phase, right? Because quite often it is. There are occasions where there might be a couple of, I've seen really great examples of how this works. We've seen some really poor ones as well, but we want to make sure that there's the smallest gap as possible. And that's ultimately because we want some skills retention. We want to keep the momentum going. We want them to start using their skills, because if not, they get realigned to another project and all of that sort of dissipates. I think that then ties back into this idea of internal alignment. So when do we use these guys? As long as that message is clear at the beginning, everybody knows what happens when we get to this bit, which is the upskilling and training piece. So I guess that's kind of my way of looking at it from a sort of programmatic and perspective of how do we get engineers in lots of different parts of the world up to a good standard without adding loads of operational complexity to what we do. And I think these are the areas that we've seen problems happen because of, perhaps just not thinking about those little pieces. Is that fair to you, Claudia, as someone who's gone through these processes with their teams? You're on mute.
Really nice the way you went back on making a connection with the internal alignment being important. When are you going to start using the external resources that you now have? And so everything must be aligned in such a way that you won't find yourself in a situation that, number one, the partner has spent a lot of time training their professionals, dedicated them to, or have assigned some time and slots for their work for that specific partner, and then the work doesn't come. So that kind of, from the perspective of our partner, that means they won't have the people they need, the trained and prepared engineers they need at a time that there is a requirement, because they're no longer available. They had to be reassigned to something else. So ultimately, it's very important to have this process, and everything is connected, from the internal alignment to the trust we talked about with the partner to now training and the utilization of these resources as well.
That's a fair point. And before we move to the next point, I suppose one of the things that's also important to ask, and another area, it's about just kind of helping the vendor engineer, if they are the ones to align to the external partner, just to reorientate their mindset a little bit. Say, hey, look, you're really great at what you do. Please make sure they share your methods and they keep your standard. But also, make sure that the whole relationship is correctly positioned, because otherwise we have to go back and explain to them what we're doing, and it's very easy for folk to forget. So actually, this is, it's also about helping vendor engineers who are aligned to your externals just kind of reorientate to how we're going to work. Because obviously sometimes it's different. And again, I say that from a services only perspective. I know that isn't an issue when it's into the VARs and DISTI community. Yeah. Claudia, what do you think about quality? I mean, it's just, who's ever sold no quality, I suppose.
Yeah, but, it's sometimes something that we say quality as an approach. Again, it kind of brushes on the word culture again. The approach, the culture is for quality, not just the spending your time. And I often use the word investing. Is investing time and effort and having meetings and training, upskilling the engineers so that you can keep that quality ongoing. So regularly doing it. And also when it comes to preparing your external resources to provide that quality constantly also means to be able to give them access to the resources that they need. And that might mean to forums, it might mean to internal portals that you have important and good information for maybe best practices or new versions of something that they need. So having, again, back to that trust, making your external team part of your team with the same objectives to be able to give, to provide that the level of quality of those services. When I say the service, it's everything included, not just the engineer came and provided the implementation, the deployment, the integration that was requested, but also has provided and left that feeling that the company that you're working with is a company that takes quality to another level. It's not what you deliver, it's the minimum of what you deliver, plus extra support that you can give because you have access to those resources. So again, these projects are very complex and it requires good management of those projects. Therefore, I think it's important. One of the bullet points here, mentioning project management and program processes and approaches, because it's part of the success of that delivery. So the quality being an approach, being part of the culture, trust and quality, and it all kind of brushes one onto the other to be able to deliver that. And of course, the experience that we have, for example, just sometimes some of the points you made really made me think they are often afterthoughts for some of these companies, and we know they're going to come. So again, back to that transparency and challenges that we share from the beginning. So absolutely paramount, this quality, tightly connected to training and upskilling.
Yeah, it is, certainly. And I think, it goes to initially, yes, I agree. Initially, it is very much connected to it. And then ongoing training. And I think that's probably sort of underpins a couple of these points as well. It really depends what kind of deployment we're talking about. So, I can break that down. So thinking about how to ensure quality consistency and those CSAT scores, those all important CSAT scores across the folk that you deploy, whether internal or external, regular deployment of those engineers. And there's a couple of ways where that sort of slightly breaks down. So a good example of that is where we deliver a number of technical training programs where we own it end to end, and that's absolutely fine. We have the portals, we have the ability to schedule, we have folk in the office with all sorts of different languages, unlike me floating around with terrible English and nothing else. But we have everything to deliver technical training programs and do for a number of organizations currently. But there are also occasions where we're asked to deploy guys into programs that are run by the vendor themselves, which is fine. We can do that too. And that's where like regular deployment makes sense. You must say, I really need French. I need French coverage. Okay, yeah, fine. French guy in place for their 3 courses in France a year. Good. But what are we going to do? Their English is great. We're going to give them some English work as well. Let's make sure that at least, how do we keep their skills up? The regular deployment. So rather than just giving folk, in this case, only French, the French speaker, how much of the English language stuff can we pass over that makes sure that they've got that everyone's priced in from to be able to deliver that value. So 3 courses a year in that example isn't good enough, right? You need to get it up 6, 7, 8, and starts to fine, that works. Then providing their English is good, they've got the UK, they've got the rest of the world, they've got the US, providing they're okay with the delivery time. That's also the case, I think, for delivering field engineering. So if you're an organization of, let's say, using partners as a last resort, what does that look like, right? And it's always a bit of a risky strategy because they'll never be able to deliver to the same standard because the work is so uncertain, right? But there is ways around that, of course, with some predictability, and going back to communication and trust, you can figure it out. That said, there is no substitute for consistent, I should say consistent rather than regular, right? So consistent deployment of engineers, because consistency gives you some predictability, which means folk know what they're working towards to some extent. The other one I think is ongoing training. So making sure that guys have access. We have our own infrastructure. So the first thing we do when we work with new organizations is implement new technology and do our best to break it and rebuild it, because that helps the guys get hands-on and experience and explore as you would expect in internal. That's not always possible. So where they are able to have access to demo kits and labs, that's all really, really helpful for that ongoing piece, particularly when version changes come in place and we might not have access to the same internal material. But by the way, that's the next point. Do your services partners have access to that? Because it's not uncommon to have a version upgrade and then only found out when you're on site. That'd be embarrassing, right? So you don't want that. Nobody wants that, especially the engineer looking at the customer thinking, what feature? Is that a feature in version 10? Like, no, big version upgrade, V11. Okay, is it? When was it? Last week? Was it? Oh gosh. So that's not great for anyone. And the other point is to make sure that, if less so on the technical training, more on the residency field engineering side, if the guys have the same sort of escalation capability or access as internal. So do they have, level 1, level 2 support? And do they understand how to be able to do that? That isn't always, I know there is legal issues and, guys in legal departments like to throw things around, and that's fine. There's some workarounds, hacks like Slack channels, but then it's not as consistent. We've got a Slack channel with one storage provider that's a little, I think there's 40 guys in there. So, and it's kind of a best effort endeavor. So they might answer the question. Most of the time someone answers the question, but it certainly won't be timely enough for anyone to use that to kind of save the day on the project or troubleshoot a thorny issue. So, making sure that we have the same escalation process is really, really important. And then thirdly, and finally, I should say, if you are going to lift or ask an organization like us, we actually work with another security orchestrating company, do a lot of integration. Their work as an orchestrator straddles some number of different applications within the cloud and data center space. We're going to need integrating some of that with APIs, some of that not with APIs. They might have a ticketing system. They might have something else for their profiling. It all needs to be integrated anyway. And so with them, we'll actually lift the project management and the technical piece. And so the objective around quality and the quality experience here. So do we experience the same from you as we do from vendor X? It's about us trying to, or about your partner, I say us, trying to mirror your approach, right? Everyone has a different approach to project management. Some have no approach. We do come across those, and that's okay too. But most folk have a process or a methodology, give or take. And, we would seek to copy that, right? Because that approach, mirroring that approach, I think is really, really key to the consistency of quality experience, whether it's the vendor or one of their services partners. What we do is we then turn that into a project template on our internal system. So depending on how we work with people, that then just kind of gets spun up, and one of our PMs who are aligned and trained will then copy that, but implement that. But that's, I think, how we ensure quality and quality consistency, Claudia. I don't know if you agree. Sorry, I'm passionate about this subject.
No, you.
Sorry, great. Before Claudia go, we're on the top of 5 minutes, last 5 minutes. Just a quick note.
Okay. Where did that go?
You mentioned, what leads us to the next slide, which is keeping that quality ongoing, right? So the maintaining, which you have covered some of the points already, and communication across teams, that is very important. And you covered some of these points already. So maybe a few that you haven't mentioned yet.
Yeah. So this is a point of, it's interesting, right? Because it does go back to internal alignments, but it's really easy to fall through the cracks and to accidentally fall through the cracks, particularly when you're in a fast changing industry, things are happening, strategic imperative shift, and then you've got on top of that, you've got personnel changes. So it's always nice to work with someone who's been in the job for a while and who's thinking of staying there for a while, because that does give us a little bit more consistency. But I know that's not always possible in today's world. But clear partnership objectives. Now, what are we trying to achieve? It's okay to write them down and to focus on those. I think that especially in the early stages of a relationship, or sounds like Tinder rather than services, but no, what I mean is the early stages of getting projects, moving. There is often, I find I've had to make the case across lots of different parts of the business, which is great because for us that's good exposure and good, become more wedged in and adding value and understanding the company, which is really important if you're going to be a centre of excellence. And I suppose a sub point of this is that we always seek to be a centre of technical excellence in a vendor's area, in their technology. But then we only really ever approach companies that we believe we've got some great technical value to offer, and then the programmatic and PMO levels on top of that, and plus the language reach. And I think that's why we try to talk to some of the folk on the call today about whether or not we can work with them.
Indeed.
But those regular QBRs are important, and even shorter, every sort of month or 6 weeks at the beginning of the project. You might need your services guy, your train, depending on what project you have. I'd say services rather broadly, your channel rep, if that's the direction you want us to go in. Are we getting past this to channel? Is that clear? There's got to be some sort of phased handover. What happens very often is, okay, we're ramped up, okay, ready to go. Okay, let's what are we doing? Are we doing a subcon piece? This should be explicit beforehand. Yeah, we'll do a little bit of that, but just to make sure we're on the same page. But the real value here in this example is supporting our channel partners because you're a zero conflict partner, right? Okay, great. And then you almost have to restart the relationship with the new set of stakeholders because there's been no handover or no consistency between them. So the only sense of urgency is the urgency coming from our side of the table, even though there is a sense of urgency within the organization, because they're subsequently surprised when things kind of peter out, if they do peter out, or they perhaps don't get to the same point of value that they could otherwise reach. And that's simply because of those handovers. And I think those regular meetings, certainly for the first 4 to 6 months, are really, really important. Socializing success across the wider organization. I think everyone likes to be part of a success story, but just being aware of the effort that goes into these things. It's like a graceful swan. We paddle furiously under the water. And I think that's exactly what happens when you're getting engineers ready in 5 or 6 different countries to deliver projects and everything else. And I think it's important for people to recognize that, because certainly from a services company perspective, there's a lot of investment in time, which is ultimately financial, that folk don't realize. Again, it goes back to this idea of thinking for each other. You take 4 guys and you put them through a 3-month readiness program. That's a year of opportunity cost gone, right? There's a year of opportunity cost. There's a year-long opportunity cost there when you add them up. So it can be significant. So making sure we have that momentum is really important. And I think the final point is, and it depends because every vendor is different, depends on the problem you're trying to solve. And small tactical needs are also great. We want those too, but it's also about recognizing that and this is from my perspective anyway, from a Pegasus perspective, hey, we came in to solve your fact that you have a backlog of integration projects. No worries. How do we get introduced to with your training piece, your field engineering? There's still a need, even though we're in a kind of a difficult challenge in the world. What does your residency piece look like? Are we expecting, to rather than, to find ways in which we can extend that relationship, extend that mutual investment? Because one of the other things is I think one of the lessons learned for me as we come to the end of this is that the more the vendor invests in some of these more nuanced forms, the more success we get for them. It's not necessarily a heavy financial investment, but thinking that mind share, the more success we have. And I think that, again, is something that underpins these other 5 points. Claudia, you agree in your experience?
Totally. I totally agree with that. And I was just aware of the fact that maybe those here with us today are thinking, I recognize this in our company. We need to do this. And sometimes that recognition of challenges that you have achieving those projects can be overwhelming. And I think that's when professionals such as the team we have in Pegasus, we kind of will guide you through. We know how to go through about these things. We have had these challenges. And certainly all those points that we have shared here with you, we see them happening over and over again. And we could, summarizing it all. So it all stitches together, from the internal alignment to the culture to training to keeping that quality ongoing and maintaining that momentum and not losing the opportunities by not being aligned to start with. So yeah, definitely agree.
On that note, I guess just it's a shout out to anyone on the call today, and thank you everyone for joining today. But if you did want to talk through any of these points, just purely from a practical perspective, I'd love to carry on the conversation after the call, by email, by phone, whatever you want. And that's because I think if anything, my motivation for getting involved in this webinar today was, honestly, how can we help people not make the same mistakes over and over again? Because we work with 14 different vendors. We see the same mistakes. Could someone please learn from us? Because, when we get the opportunity to share, things become a lot more effective and there's a lot more value for all involved. So I really appreciate that. And with that, I think my details are on the next slide, Marcella, as well, if I'm not mistaken. There's me in a day I decided not to iron my shirts. They decided to take the picture. But it's the new look, I'm told. Please do get in touch, and very much like to carry on the conversation as well. So I also, Claudia, always appreciate your time. And with that, I want to say happy birthday, because I know, Claudia, it was your birthday yesterday. So happy 21st.
Thank you very much, and thank you, Will. Your experience is precious to those here today, I'm pretty sure, and I'm pretty sure as well that much of what we spoke about is close to their heart, and it's also close to our heart to help us succeed and get good return on your investment with your partners. So let's grow your post-sales services and use this knowledge to do so. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Marcella. Back to you.
So any questions or anything that you have left, please let us know, and we're happy to help. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.